Hello, welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast, I want to talk about the death of average. So, as a marketing, as a creative, or a marketing expert, as a creative, over the years, there's been a difference between those who did marketing themselves and those who went professionally, hired a service, found an expert, those kinds of things. The gap between those two kind of deliverables, I think, is slowly kind of met each other. The gap is reduced because tools became more accessible. Things like Canva became easier. AI has obviously expedited a lot of aspects of it with creativity and writing prompts and creative strategies and content and all these different things. When you think about the average of where most people are from a marketing perspective, those who do it themselves have now closed the gap on those who do it professionally. So the biggest thing that now separates, the experts from the rest of them is its identity, its brand, its human connection, and it's the ability to kind of read between the lines and find those niches and those things that still work independently for those brands, for those industries, and exclusively for those clients and products that are unique in the marketplace. So with that said, let's get into it. A lot of these tools are accessible by anybody. And a lot of the questions I get asked are, are these tools good? Do they provide the quality? Are they the same as, designing something in Photoshop? Is that the same as doing something in Canva, for example? And the answer is kind of, sort of. It just depends on what your knowledge is of it. So if your goal is to just create content, get it out the door, or create graphics and get it out the door in order to fill a calendar and get things moving on social media as far as plugging those holes, then yeah, it'll work. But I think those who know the difference in quality design versus something you can whip up in Canva, I think that's where the gap is going to present itself. So now, just for fun, I'm not knocking anybody who uses those tools, whether they use, a Wix-based website or Canva or whatever, because there is a time and a place to use those kinds of tools. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that as those tools have become more prevalent, and now with AI kind of adding this extra layer on top of it and or doing some of the same things, it's really made producing these things a lot more achievable for the regular person. But it's also, there's a lot of nuances and gaps that need to be filled in there that the regular person doesn't really know because they don't live and breathe within the marketing space. They don't really know what it is they're looking at. So if you don't really understand the nuances, how potentially one graphic would work better than the other, there's that gap there that I don't know how you necessarily teach that unless you kind of live, breathe, and experience that on your own by engaging on social media and within marketing tactics. So the trick there is that I think there's a lot of education that's also getting lost. So the freedom in these tools and the ability to create this stuff with little to no expertise in the the creative space, it's kind of a curse and a blessing. So I was on a social media call this morning, and one of the questions that came up was, whether or not we wanted to stand out or whether or not we wanted to blend in. And it reminds me of this topic because right now in marketing and graphics and creativity, social media, you name it, a lot of these brands, these tactics, the look and feel, we're all starting to look and sound the same. And the reason for that is because we're all using the same tools. We're using AI. We're using simple prompting methods that, are kind of generating similar results. A lot of times, it's hard not to find a company that doesn't have a Canva account right now. And think about it. If we're all logging into, especially if we're in the same industry or niche, we're pulling from the same templates. We're pulling from the same graphics and images and stock photography and you name it. So there's that as well, just from a visual side. And then you think about social media. If you're on TikTok or Instagram and you're seeing the reels and the videos and the different trends, everybody's jumping on those trends. So in some ways, it's like, yeah, if you want to jump on the trend, you're going to have to be one of the first people to do it. But is it really a trend at that point? Or if you're somebody that's jumping on because everybody else is doing it. Okay, cool. You've now jumped on and you're part of the trend. But if you and 50 of your competitors are doing the same thing, then are you standing out at all? Just to kind of package that all up, I'm not saying don't do these things, because I do think it's important to, you got to find what works in your business. And I think there's trends and different things that happen on social media that might lend themselves towards your brand or maybe it's your culture or whatever it is. But if you're not watching your neighbor and trying to figure out how to stand out, then you are intentionally leaning into this idea of blending in, which is not what you want from a business and or marketing perspective. That's the thing. If you don't know what you're looking at, or if maybe you're not hyper aware of who's doing what, there's a chance that those things could escape you. There's a chance that you might not pick up on the pattern. But as everyone continues to adopt this, and as everybody kind of levels up their game to be somewhat similar and or in parallel to each other, there's now no differentiator between those who are doing it well versus those who are doing it at all, because now everybody's doing this version. So there's nobody's standing out. And if you're somebody that, like, when you started this whole journey, you weren't really doing much on social media or you weren't doing anything at all, this is a major upgrade for you. But at the same time, now that you're there, you're at the same level and or slightly below everybody else, which basically just brought the foundation or brought the basement up to where you are. So yes, from a ceremonial standpoint, you are engaging and you are participating within social media, but you're not going to get the reactions. You're not going to get the likes, comments, the shares, the engagements, because now everybody's doing the same thing. So the question really is if everyone can create content now, does content itself become less valuable? And I would say, depends on what business you're in and how saturated it is. I think generating content, that's a good first step, but I think its uniqueness and how you apply it to your brand and how you perhaps introduce your own connection to your audience and your consumer and those kinds of things, that's what's going to separate you. So I think content as a whole is a great thing, and I think everybody should continue to do it. But I think it's taking that extra time to make sure that when you're doing it, you're adding that piece in, like I said, it's you're basically bringing yourself up to the level of looking like everybody else. So how do you combat that? Like, how do you not fall into that trap? Because, to be honest, everybody does it. If you went and even looked at our own social media, we're probably guilty of it as well. But I guess my point is it's something to watch for, and it's something to keep an eye out for as you develop your strategy and as you continue to market your own business or market other businesses or whatever. But, how do you combat that? Well, I think the ultimate tool against that is to always make sure you're introducing and or maintaining this personality of your brand. So when you think about founder brands where maybe there's a personal brand attached to it where somebody is the spokesperson of that brand, that's a primary example where you can differentiate because we're all one of one. So if that person is the spokesperson, to try to lean into that aspect of it, so that's probably a point of differentiation. There's podcasts and content. AI can generate a lot of things, but when you actually start recording your own content, when you're videoing yourself or whether or not you have a podcast, you have the ability to not only speak on topics that are potentially trending or popular, during that time frame, but you could talk about it from your own perspective, from your own experience and in your own voice, which if there's anything we know about social media is we like and follow people that, maybe resonate with our industry or our own thought process. But at the same time, we just like who we like. We think so-and-so's funny, or we think so-and-so's attractive, or I think they talk funny, or whatever it is. You follow who you follow for a reason. And there's somebody out there for everybody when it comes to branding and following those brands. So the more you could put yourself out there, like I said, podcasts, videos, whatever it is, that's a great way to stand out from the competition. And the other thing is opinion-based content. So exactly what we're doing here. And what brought us to this is that I spend so many time answering these questions, not only internally with my own team as we talk about it all the time, but we're always talking about with clients. We get customers to call us and ask us these questions. And it's like we're always kind of talking through these scenarios because they themselves are on social media. They're seeing, maybe what's happening in the news with AI and, businesses closing and all these different things. So they're asking us questions about how does this affect me? Or is this something we should keep on our radar? And we're talking about it all the time. So we're constantly giving our educated opinion on this, but we just had to stop and go, well, why aren't we just putting this out there for everybody? I mean, yes, we can continue to give that information away for free to our clients and whatnot, but why don't we just put it out there and use it as a way to establish ourselves in the market and to build trust with people who think like us or want more information on topics like this. So as we were preparing for this episode, one of the questions that came up was whether or not AI has made the idea of and the art of creativity more important or less important. Personally, like holistically, I think it's made it more important. And I also think it has evolved the thinking process of how we get there. So let's say in a pre-AI world, creativity was something that was kind of developed on the fly. It maybe came out in the form of doodles, sketches, brainstorms, those kinds of things. And it still can in many ways. But in a post-AI existence, now when you're going to sit down and you're going to write a prompt, now from an analytical standpoint, you're going to think through that creative thought. You got to go, okay, well, if I was going to do X, Y, and Z, how would I prompt that? How would I coach that? And then there's varying levels of how you're utilizing and or leveraging AI. So if you're a beginner and you're like, hey, I'm not that far down the road, I'm just trying to get started, your prompting strategy and the way you approach it's probably it's probably not that overly complicated. But if you're a seasoned artist or a marketer or a strategist, these kinds of things, and you're using AI as part of the tool or part of the solution to at least get you started, maybe it's a, idea generation, kind of an idea or process, then of course, yeah, your nuances and your detail and your strategy and all those different things are now coming out in a different way so that you can articulate it within the prompt to AI. So do I think it's more or less important? I actually think it's probably more important, and it's evolved into different areas because now the creativity matters even more. And like I've been saying throughout this episode, as the average is now disappearing because everybody can now meet that threshold, the difference between stopping there and continuing and using that creativity to put yourself out there in front of that new average, it's huge. And it's that much more important that we be creative at this time. So now that we're talking about average, what happens when average is that accessible? What happens when just about anybody can sit down and fumble their way through ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is and get to that place where, maybe they couldn't before, where they had to hire a professional or just kind of go without? What happens when average becomes free? For one, I think it's great for those, for those people who never saw themselves as creative, for those people who never hired an agency or worked with an artist. It's probably a totally different world for them. It's probably fun for them, and they're able to create and generate pieces of their business that they weren't able to before. Now, I am saying there's some liabilities and some different things they need to be considering in that process. But as far as having that tool and being able to generate some of those things on their own, yeah, it's probably a pretty good thing. However, for the agency people, for the creatives, for the freelancers, whether you're a web designer, a logo artist, illustrator, whatever it is you're doing, it changes things a lot because I think to the uneducated or the people who maybe didn't quite see the value of those services or those industries anyway, it does make it free. It does devalue the work that we do because those people can't see the difference. I always, it's similar to me like when Fiverr first came out, and used in the right way, I think Fiverr was a pretty cool site. It did a lot of good things in a way, but it also dropped the value down because everybody thought, well, if I can get a logo for $5, why would I pay X, Y, and Z or pay thousands of dollars for that? And, most people are like, well, do you want a quality logo or do you want a cheap logo? Most people have that ability to think through that logic, do the math on it, and kind of figure out the difference between those two things. And, and that works to a point, but for those people who are truly seeking cheap, or they truly don't know the difference, or they want something really quick hitting and fast, then yeah, it changes what we do in a major way, because now you're trying to convince somebody, or you're having to educate somebody of the difference between cheap and value. And I'm not saying that AI can't generate some quality things. It can, but there's legalities around it. There's probably some things you want to look at. There's some concerns about, if you've heard anything about like the artist pushback on this whole thing of where this inspiration is being pulled from. And I'm not an expert on what's right or wrong there, but for any business owner or any artist that's just blindly turning in AI as their homework, I would pump the brakes on that and be a little bit careful with it, because we don't know how this thing, as far as that goes, we don't know exactly how that's all going to pan out. But it definitely has changed the value of what we do and has created an urgency around finding clients that appreciate what you do and actually know the difference. To be honest, value their brand enough to want that value to come with it, to come with the deliverables. So one of the things I love about this whole thing, and partly because it's coming back to a place that's special to me, but it's also leaning into kind of where we've been the whole time. Where I'm going with this is the whole authenticity piece. I feel like that word is completely overused, and depending on who's giving you the description of it, I might agree or disagree. But for me, authenticity is just showing up and being exactly who you are and being unapologetic about it, but putting it out there as part of an ingredient within the recipe of your brand. So the question, is authenticity all of a sudden more valuable again? Is it more relevant than maybe it was 2, 3, 4 years ago? I personally feel like, yes, it is. I think we went through a phase where being authentic kind of became cliche. I think being authentic was a true superpower. I think everybody jumped on board with it and thought, hey, I'll be authentic. And all of a sudden, everybody's authentic. And then it didn't mean anything anymore. And then during that process, I think everybody started, whether it was Canva or whether it was, WYSIWYG type websites where you don't need to be developers anymore, and people were generating their own content or starting their own YouTube channels. It became people were able to just build these things and do these things for themselves. And somewhere in that authenticity, I think we became caricatures of ourselves. And all of a sudden, those who we thought were authentic weren't that authentic anymore. Bill Cosby wasn't Bill Cosby anymore after P. Diddy wasn't P. Diddy. And we found out all these things, that authenticity was kind of a sham for a little bit. And now that we're back in this space where we don't know who's who, and we don't know what's AI generated versus, written by a human. We don't know if this was designed in Photoshop. Was this really creativity? The comic book industry is running into artists where they're trying to turn in AI homework in competition with people who actually know how to draw and illustrate. It's become kind of a questionable time in creativity and in art and design and marketing and all these things. So being able to truly be authentic and be real and be honest, I think now is becoming fashionable again. So I think authenticity is making a comeback. And I think brands from this point forward, it's going to be a major ingredient of how you stand out against your competition. And it's going to be one of the main ingredients why people choose your brand, your client, why they choose you. Because they're not going to necessarily be able to decipher you from anybody else if we all look the same. I'm even going to go as far as to throw in the idea that along with authenticity, I think nostalgia and retro branding are all things that are exploding right now. Again, I think that's been riding slightly below or at the surface this entire time because it was cool. People liked it. Part of the reason why people liked it is because it reminded them of something. It was relatable. It was something that they could connect to. And again, now with everything that's going on in the industry and kind of the uncertainty of the industry, but also again, who's doing what and how they're getting there. I think people are thinking, maybe we fixed something that wasn't broken at all. Maybe we kind of like that retro vibe. Maybe nostalgia does play a part in this whole thing. So I think when you look at I personally feel like, again, those are going to be recipes or those are going to be ingredients in the recipe of your brand. Whether you have a deep, rich 100-year history or not, I think there's methods and there's stories behind how you got there, why you got there, and who you are as a brand. How you feel about that is nostalgia. So I think nostalgia is part of that. It's the texture of what you do. It's the backdrop of who you are as a person and a brand. So the big question with this is, okay, Mike, so if what you're saying is true and if this is a thing, how do we plan for this? How do we take what we have and how do we combat this? How do we prepare for, how do we look at this from a marathon perspective and not a sprint? How do we adjust? The biggest thing I can say is that I think it's important to know who you are. I think it's to do a self-calibration of your brand, what that authenticity looks like, how that fits, who your audience is, what niche you're chasing. Just be sure about the direction you're taking your company and how you'd like to present it. And then it's a matter of consistency. It's about showing up. It's about being in all those places over time. And it's a long-term roadmap to not only combat this quick-hitting, quick-paced environment we're in right now, but it's going to give you solid foundation in which to kind of work from. So as things continue to evolve and pivot and change and adjust here in the next couple years, months, whatever it is, that consistency is your foundation in which to pull from and work from. So showing up repeatedly, making sure that you're consistent in your posting, that you're accurate and you're dialed into your authenticity and your why behind your brand. I would say most people right now, and it was great when we were jumping on this train, it was great because the results and everything seemed like it was coming so fast, and that's really not the game. It's the long-term game. So most businesses at this point, they're used to quitting before the results ever show up. They're not giving it the time and the patience that it requires to actually show a proper ROI. We've had clients in the last, call it year and a half, that they threw in the towel after 90 days because they didn't see the results they wanted, which, to be fair, yeah, I guess we might have needed to go down that road a little further, explain that a little more and teach them a little more before we ever got that far. But I don't know who promised them that we'd get results in 90 days anyway. So it does take time. And that's the part I think that most people are now kind of thinking through. Well, what does that look like? Well, it's going to be different depending on what you're doing, but that commitment and vision and kind of understanding that it does take time, that's your first step. Put that in the plan, bake that into your strategy. And as you build out your plan for marketing, whether it's social media or otherwise, plan for it. And then that way you'll know exactly what to expect. So to recap and put a fork in this conversation, the question still remains that if AI made average free, what becomes valuable moving forward? And like I said at the beginning, I wanted to do an episode about the death of average. So what does average really mean? What does that look like? For me, when we're looking at average and what is now valuable in comparison to, I think we've touched on it, but it's creativity, it's taste, style, uniqueness, because you want to stand out as a brand, but you want it to be accurate to your look, your feel, your vibe, all those things. I think it's the perspective, so if there's a perspective or a certain way you want your brand to come across, I think that needs to be portrayed in your messaging. It needs to be dialed in and aligned with everything you're doing from a look, feel, and authenticity standpoint. I think there's very much a storytelling aspect to it. So we already talked a little bit about nostalgia, a little bit about retro branding. A lot of that can be your storytelling. It can be how you paint that picture for your audience as to who you are, what you're about, and how you got to where you're at. We talked about authenticity. Again, we don't have to get into that again, but that's a big one. Who are you and why should they choose you? If you lined up 10 great companies and they all do very similar things, why should they pick you amongst the other 9? I already said this with the social media piece and kind of building that plan out, but consistency and commitment, I think, go hand in hand. You need to set milestones. You need to commit to a plan, set milestones and kind of checkpoints along the way in which you'll take a step back, measure, and then continue. But the consistency to see that plan through as it aligns to the plan you created, the strategy you've set forth, that's the best way to measure this thing and figure out if it's working, not working, or if you need to adjust at that time. So to me, don't get me wrong, AI is a tool to be leveraged. I think it's awesome, but used in the right way. And also, like I said, keeping your radar up of when is using too much AI going too far, and when are you starting to blend into the point where it's hurting your brand. So personally, I feel like the future belongs to businesses that know exactly who they are and those who can execute and kind of develop their plan, their strategy, and their approach for their business from that.